Welcome to The Real Math of Business with Eleanor Bennett, where you plus this podcast equals better decisions. I'm Eleanor Bennett, and I work with founders and CEOs to help them make better decisions as complexity grows. I'm fascinated with how people shape systems and systems shape people, and I'm on a mission to help leaders create companies where people serve people and the math just works. Now, we usually do a thought-provoking headline here, but my guest and I actually get straight into a huge story in Australian sport right now at the start of this conversation. So without further ado, here's our chat with Errol Amerasekera. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome our guest, Errol Amerasekera, author of From Fear to Flow, The Adaptive Safety Revolution. He's a consultant, performance coach and speaker who, for nearly 2 decades, has worked across elite sport, corporate organisations and high-stakes professional environments. He is a thought leader in the area of what safety looks like in an organisational context and has developed the concept of adaptive safety. He is also the owner of Bluestone Edge, a consultancy that supports organisations with the complexities of leadership, culture, performance and inclusion. Errol, so wonderful to have you here today. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Eleanor. What a great introduction. Great to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. So I'm going to start, as those of you who've listened before, and Errol, you may know, I don't really come in with a script. What I love to do is just have an unscripted conversation where we can go down whatever rabbit hole we'd like to. And I guess my opening question is inspired by a conversation I had with my 2 teenage girls this morning on the way to school. And obviously, let's just, call it out loud. There's been a lot of press this week around what's happened with the Sydney Swans. And it's a very sensitive topic, but what it does is open up a lot of questions around lots of different things, around, we live just north of Sydney. Sydney Swans is who my eldest daughter goes for. The rest of us go for Geelong Cats. Go Cats. So, there was a lot of conversation in the car around what's happened. What does that mean for, women and the relationship between men and women? Because there's a lot of that stuff happening in the school context as well. We talked a lot about, because we are getting to the pointy end of the season, what does that mean for the rest of the players in the team? That, for those of you who don't follow AFL, 5 of their key players have been ruled out for the rest of the season. The Sydney Swans were on a trajectory to potentially make the final, they're going to make the final, but make the grand final and possibly the premiership. Because of the players that have been ruled out, it's fair to say that could be in jeopardy. So part of the conversation we were having this morning was, what does that mean for the rest of the players who now have to try and maintain their performance without these key players, what they might be feeling personally in terms of what's happened, not only the impact on the sport and the games, but the impact on them personally as humans and as players. But also, the girls and I were talking about, yes, of course, what we have heard about is not good. And what is the standard we should be holding these players to, notwithstanding the fact nothing has been proven or unproven? But it does beg that question that comes up a lot with high performance or elite sports people, which is, are they just normal humans that are fallible, or do we need to hold them to a higher standard as role models? There was a very long-winded intro to my opening question, but you obviously, it made me think about these ideas of safety, psychological safety and trust, as well as in a context of high performance. And you have had direct experience with clubs in the AFL. So if you don't mind me starting there, I would just love to get your thoughts on this very complex issue.
Thanks for the question, Eleanor. It's a complicated question because there are so many different angles to approach it through. So if I start off by saying, I think what the Swans did in standing down those 5 players is really admirable. And to quote the chairperson, in effect, torpedoing their season. So they're saying that upholding our standards is more important than winning a premiership potentially. So culturally, that's making a really strong statement, both inside the club and to the community, to fans, to external stakeholders. So that's one piece I think that they've done really well. Now, I think given the sensitivity of the area, I'd probably just talk generally rather than going to specifics that we aren't aware of yet,
Correct.
not of public knowledge.
Correct.
So what we can safely probably assume is there's going to be some loss of trust inside that playing group. And this happens all the time in organizations and teams. Hopefully not as like drastic in a series as what's just happened in the Swans. But in a meeting, if you and I are part of a meeting and I'm sharing something about a challenge I'm having with a pitch coming up for a sales pitch coming up, and you roll your eyes at me, that creates a drop in trust. If I don't follow through on a commitment, that creates a lack of trust. So one of the things I know that high performance teams do, they're very good at tracking the micro slippages in trust.
Huh. Tell me
And
about that.
then repairing it almost in real time. So like in the example I just gave, so if someone rolls their eyes, you go, hang on a sec, Eleanor, Errol was sharing something like vulnerable or being honest, or he was challenging the prevailing thought, and you rolled your eyes. And then as a team, we could unpack that, which means taking a 5-minute timeout from the agenda of the meeting
Mm.
and then focusing on the cultural dynamics that happen in the moment and then going back to the agenda 5 minutes later. Now, for most leaders, for most teams, that is so counterintuitive because we've got we've got a 1 hour team meeting once a week, got just 6 things we've got to get through, to take a time out to focus on that little micro slippage in trust takes discipline, and it's really counterintuitive. I can see you already got a question brewing for me.
Well, no, I'm just agreeing fervently because you just said the word that was that I hadn't formulated the word, by the way, but the thought in my mind was, yes, it's very admirable to address it, like call it for what it is in the moment, but I can't imagine there are too many. It takes a high level of maturity for a team to be able to repair in 5 minutes. I'm thinking about some of the organizations I've seen. It would hijack the rest of the meeting. And that's why they wouldn't, for risk of hijacking the whole meeting, that's why they wouldn't address it real time. So the discipline word just really stuck out as you'd have to have that level of discipline.
Discipline, Eleanor, and capability. So my favorite saying is culture is a muscle.
Mm.
And so those of us who go to the gym or those of us who run or do any kind of like training, we know we do a new exercise, it feels clunky for the first 1,000 times. Or if you go to the gym once every 6 months, nothing happens. You go 3 times a week, something over time changes. So that cultural muscle teams have, if we work on that regularly, over time it becomes stronger. And
Yes.
we can do it in 5 minutes, that unpacking that the trust issue. At the start, it might take 15 minutes. But it's a great, I guess, microcosm or metaphor what the Swans have done. They're saying, hang on a sec, the outcome is less important right now than our standards and our culture. So let's do what we need to do to stand for our culture and our standards. So having a 5-minute timeout in a team meeting is exactly the same version as that. The agenda right now, friends, is less important than addressing this culture, this drop in trust. Because left unaddressed, that'll only compound over time. Because the eye rolling then that becomes normalized. the eye rolling, the inappropriate joke, the frustrated exhale because I'm sick of your voice, the gossip outside after the meeting finishes. Those behaviors, I call them micro behaviors, over time become normalized. And then over time, that becomes our standard.
Can I just repeat something you said? I think it was so profound and worth repeating. The agenda in the moment is less important than the drop in trust. The agenda in the moment is less important than the drop in trust. That is such a profound statement because it takes it takes a leader who's so strong in their conviction around values, behavior, etc., to be able to put their hand up and say the agenda in the moment is less important than the drop in trust.
Exactly. It takes a leader with that conviction and a team that's bought into it.
Mm.
A team that actually says and believes our culture, moment to moment, how we connect, how we get along, how we feel belonging, moment to moment, is more important than the agenda.
Wow.
Because we believe that if we focus on that culture over time, that's going to drive sustainable performance.
And that, I think, is a really interesting concept. Again, if we think about the world of sport and as a beautiful analogy to the world in business, this season is finite. It ends in September, right? So,
Yes.
yep, torpedoed the club. Yeah. But what the Swans had done and what the conversation we're having sort of more generally is actually forget about the flag this year. Because what we care about is being able to win future flags, which
Exactly.
only a reinvestment in our culture will allow.
Exactly. It's a great way of framing it, by the way. I like the way you said that, Eleanor.
Well, because you and I both know that companies are so blinded by the quarterly results, the half-year results, the year-end results. And by the way, well, for some people they would be. They're not as finite as a premiership flag.
Yes. Yes. And I think one of the things I try to like debunk in the book is that culture is this like soft thing. It's a soft skill. It's a people thing. I'm all about performance. I'm all about winning football games or cricket games. I'm all about like making more money. I'm all about growing a business. Right. I'm just suggesting the route to high performance is different to what we've maybe done in the past.
So what's the route? Tell me.
I think part of the approach to performance has been an extractive approach where we put people into an environment, we kind of extract their passion, their commitment, their intelligence, their work ethic. That's a degree of burnout. That's a degree of like transactionalness. That's a real word. I'm not sure. Right.
It is
And
now.
then people leave or get burnt out, and then the whole cycle restarts.
Yes.
And that probably mirrors how we think about our environment, think about our bodies,
Yeah.
think about our communities. So there's something, so the old model is something that's transactional, even kind of like extractive. I think the new model is something that's more has humanity at its center. That high performance is built on a relational infrastructure where the relationships and people's experience are given priority over the agenda. I'm using agenda as a metaphor
Yeah, yeah.
for, for more traditionally things we're driving towards. And I think for most leaders, most teams, most organizations, that's really counterintuitive. So it flies in the face of what we've traditionally been taught about performance and even leadership.
I'm really glad you've talked about businesses relying or needing a relational infrastructure? Because as I was learning more about you, you talk about the architecture of interdependence.
Yeah.
And I am personally fascinated between the relationship between structure or infrastructure and human attributes. Tell me, so tell me more about whether it's the architecture of interdependence or more about this relational infrastructure, because you're absolutely right. I'm going relationships over agenda. Like I can tell people will be going, but hang on a second, we can't all, link arms, sing kumbaya together. Man, you're amazing. You're so good. Let me talk about your dog all day.
Yeah.
That's where people's minds are going. Tell me what you mean by relational infrastructure. How does that work in practice? Yeah.
I think part of the confusion or part of the people's reaction you're talking about to what I'm saying is how we view things like relationships, vulnerability, this word authenticity, right, in a business sense.
Mm-hmm.
So for a start, I think relationships, authenticity, vulnerability ideally look very different in a business sense compared to like a personal sense or a out of work life sense. Because all of those things need to be like driven through the boundaries of our role.
Mm.
So if people think authentic's being like oversharing, talking about, my, you know, party on the weekend or relationship I'm having, that's not authentic based on our role in the business.
I,
So it's not like oversharing or being overly emotional. It's
yeah.
like still going, it's still based on our role. So I guess opposed to sharing about my personal life, it's like, hey, Eleanor, this project we're working on, I'm not sure of my role. I'm
Mm.
confused about this. I'm not sure how our professional relationship is going.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Can you imagine if someone said that to your work? I'm not sure how our professional relationship is going.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's it's still a role-based
Yes.
intervention,
Yes.
right? And it's still for the betterment of the outcome.
Hmm.
Knowing if we have a better relationship, we're going to have a better outcome together.
Hmm.
So, even like vulnerability, I talk about context appropriate vulnerability.
Tell me
So
about that.
so again, it's different to like, so in a personal relationship, vulnerability is about building connection, being authentic. In a professional sense, it's about opening the door to learning,
Oh.
saying, hey, I'm confused, I'm stuck, I don't know this. Who else is confused? Yeah, I'm confused too, Errol. Great, let's clarify where we're confused. That's good for our team. So I think confusion happens when we kind of take what relationships, vulnerability, authenticity look like outside the work's context and cut and paste them into a professional context or a work context or a role-based context. Because they look very different. Because in a professional context, first and foremost, we're ethically obliged to fulfill our role. We're being paid to do a job. So our primary ethical obligation is to fulfill the requirements, the demands of our role. And everything should come from that. So asking, what's the role require of me in this moment? If that's relational or task or process driven, that's what great teams do.
I'm going to go in two very different places right now. We'll get here. I
Let's
just,
do both. Let's do both.
yeah, we'll do both, but we'll start with this question because this will close the loop, the football loop. What does a role require of me in this moment? What does that mean for sports players, elite sports people,
Yes.
as role models or humans?
Wow, what a great question. The fact that we're asking the question means the role hasn't been clarified. Like if you were my manager and I said, Eleanor, we've got a busy week. Do you want me to do this or do this? That's a lack of role clarity.
Yeah, yeah,
And I can't perform until a role's been clarified, right? This is
yeah.
the same question. Like as a society, we haven't
Mm,
addressed the question of as professional athletes, what's their role? Now, if I can go a step
please do.
past that, right?
Yes.
I think, while we're talking about sport, which clearly I love, I think as a society and as professional sports, especially the big market sports like AFL, rugby league, cricket, the big three, basketball, maybe netball, we are still reconciling traditional sporting values like
Oh.
community, belonging, mateship with professional commercial values. That's
Mm,
about bums on seats or viewership or contract agreements, sponsorship deals. We haven't reconciled those two sets of values yet. So, and often in sport, you can see those values conflicting.
yes.
Are we professional athletes? And our job is just to go out there, make money for me and my family and win football games or cricket games?
Mm,
Or do those community values from the 70s and 80s, mateship, community, belonging, are they still current today? And that's an unanswered question. We haven't sat down and had a robust discussion around what's the value set in current times that professional athletes need to be held to.
whose responsibility is it to do that reconciliation? Does that, because obviously, a lot of what lay people like me who are not in the inner circle, I'm just a, sporting fan. Um, I sit in the voice of public opinion, the court of public opinion, right?
Yeah,
But so you could say, well, it's the public's view that matters. The public get to make that decision. But I can also see an argument, I guess that to me doesn't feel right. Um, but whose responsibility is that? Is it the club level, the league level, Australian body level? Whose job is it to reconcile that? Because I think that's an outstanding point.
I think it's everyone's job. It's individual clubs, it's governing bodies, like if it's the AFL or Cricket Australia or rugby league, and they need to do that knowing the public are really critical stakeholders.
Yeah.
The public, obviously are fans. They buy tickets, they buy merchandise. No,
And and
so
and look, like any stakeholder, sorry to jump in, but
no,
like any stakeholder, you can like it or lump it. So I think, like you've really well articulated, the challenge is no one has reconciled that. But in the media, that's a lot of the rhetoric is, what's the responsibility? What's their role? The truth is there is no role clarity.
exactly.
And that is the problem. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There needs to be some people put their hand up and say, we're going to have a go. Yes, we'll probably get it wrong for a large amount of people, but that's okay. That's okay. People are allowed to opt in and out depending on if that aligns with their values or not.
Exactly. And because we haven't kind of unpacked that question, depending on your perspective, you'll think, these are extreme viewpoints. No, athletes are supposed to be role models. Or you'll think, no, they're just athletes, do their job, make money, win a football game or win a cricket game.
Mm.
So there's no consensus, is a better word,
Yes.
over that question in terms of what's the role of professional athletes in society. So even the athletes themselves get mixed messages. So how
Correct.
can we expect them to like uphold expectations when the expectations themselves
Are not clear.
are not clear?
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. I do need to come back to.
And so one more thing if I
Yeah.
can. So
Yes.
and at the risk of starting a firestorm on your podcast.
Let's do it.
So, so in that way, I wouldn't say like victims is a strong word, but athletes themselves are suffering from this because they haven't been told what their role is. Then when they're behaving the wrong way from our point of view, they get hung out to dry. Now, we shouldn't feel sorry for like athletes making a lot of money and living a great life in some respects, but they're also their behavior is a consequence of this lack of clarity. So how can we blame athletes when they uphold our expectations when, as you said, that's never been clarified? So the step I want to go to then is what's the role of compassion and kindness? To see rather than a team member or an athlete just being an idiot, right? How do we do two things? How do we hold them personally accountable to their behavior? And how do we also demonstrate compassion and kindness and how we do that? And both of those things are really important. And to some people, they might sound mutually exclusive, that you can't do both.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the best leaders and the best teams know how to do both.
And I think in that, thank you for going to that level of depth. It reminds me actually of a conversation I had with a client recently in the business context. And he said, Eleanor, I think we've got a people problem. Oh, tell me about that. Anyway, oh, well, they're not doing their job. They're underperforming. Oh, so this sounds like a performance problem. Yeah. Okay, so what are they doing? What are they not doing? Oh, well, they're not doing this part of their job. Okay. And then my client said, but actually, we have just restructured and we have changed their job. So they might not know that that's part of their job. I said, this is not an underperformance problem. You cannot blame them for not doing a part of their job that you have not clearly articulated yet.
Yes.
And that, I just draw that really clear business link because, yes, we've been talking about it in a sports context, but we see that all the time. And what it
Yes.
is, it's a role clarity problem dressed up as a people problem or a performance problem. And it's neither of those two things.
Exactly. And a role clarity problem is a cultural problem because if I don't feel clear in my role, do I feel safe enough to express that?
Hmm.
Right.
Mm.
Like you would be, I'm sure actually you wouldn't be amazed. I have so many clients who come to me saying, Errol, we did a major restructure. Could be the whole organization, could be we could change the whole executive management team because we had cultural issues. And 6 months later, with 8 different bums on 8 different seats, we still have a cultural issue. So I often think what looks like a structural issue or a process issue is actually a cultural issue. But because a structural issue is more tangible, we can see the organisational chart and know which bums are on which seats. That's the easy fix.
Mm.
That's the go-to fix, the default approach. Again, we've got a structure issue, we got a personnel issue, we got a performance issue. Whereas because culture is this thing that's nebulous, it's like harder to codify, it's harder to put a finger on. We'd rather do a restructure and spend probably 10 times the amount it costs
Yes.
to do a cultural reset. And in 6 months' time, we're back where we started.
Well, you know where we've got to go. We've got to go to the real math of business ratio question. And what I'm connecting in this just last moment of our conversation is you've talked about we're confusing structural issues as, we say structural issues are actually cultural issues. And in the just prior conversation, you said actually what we need to do is find a way to hold these elite athletes personally accountable, but doing so in a way where we can hold compassion and kindness whilst doing that. And so in both examples, one's a more business macro lens, one is a more micro sports lens, but I think both of them still draw out this tension that underpins the idea of a real math of business, which there's a tension or sometimes there's a relationship between people, culture, behavior, attributes like compassion and kindness with math, whether that be through logic and structure, whether that through be accountability of performance. I'd really love to kind of get stuck into, we like to get a ratio from all of our guests, Errol, and sometimes we have a lot of fun getting to that ratio if it hasn't got one already.
Yes.
I don't know where your head is at in terms of what that ratio of people and math may be. I don't know if there's one for business, one for sport, one for personal. I'd love your lens on that.
So I'm not avoiding your question. I'll come back to the ratio in a second. But I'd love to challenge even the fact that those two are different. Like it's an either or, right? Like we're setting up a binary kind of situation. Because I think the best teams and organizations I work with, they see culture as business as usual. It's not separate. So one of the big goals of my book is to change how we see and perceive this thing called working on culture, right? Because often it's like it's the offsite, it's the workshop every 3 months, it's the external thing. Errol comes in, Alan comes in, does a training session, right? And that's the culture work for the year. Or we do a team building session and do go-karting or bungee jumping, whatever it might be, right?
Yes.
And back to my culture as a muscle metaphor. That's like saying, I train once every 6 months. Why aren't I getting stronger or fitter?
Yes.
Right? We do an offsite every 6 months. I'd be like saying, yeah, but I trained for 6 hours in the gym that day. Why aren't I getting stronger? It's the same metaphor, right? We do this big workout and then wonder why cultures don't shift. So a key question is, how do we weave culture in to just the regular rhythms of business? So, for example, after your 1 hour team meeting or in the last 5 minutes, every week you do 3 questions. Like, where do we show trust today? Where do we have connection? Whose voice didn't we hear? Or where do we get stuck? What do we learn? What do we change for next time? And the first 20 times, that feels clunky and like contrived and awkward. But after 50 times, that becomes a muscle. And we're developing that team's reflective capability, which is actually their learning capacity. And I believe, given how fast business is moving these days, one of the most critical capacities, capabilities that will determine business's success is how well we learn and how fast we adapt. So if those two are like getting muscles, how does that 5-minute little debrief after your weekly team meeting over time, that compounding workout, build that capability? Now that to me is far more effective than a 1 or 2 day offsite every 6 months. So can I come back to your question now about the ratio?
Please.
Okay. So in thinking about your question, I want to frame it as how I think about math and people. So under the bucket of math, I think that things are a little bit more objective. So things like work ethic, intelligence, resources, processes. Now, those things to me are talent's another one, right? Those things are critically important. If I was to run on the AFL field, no matter how good the culture was, I would be hopeless, right? If I was to get a job with Google as a coder, I would be equally hopeless, right? So that's like the math part. The people part to me is the culture and the environment. So I think those two are equally important, right? So on first cut, I would say 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
However, what I think is for a lot of us, we overestimate the importance of work ethic, talent, intelligent resources, and we underestimate the importance of the environment and culture. So given that, I would say 60-40 in favor of people. And to demonstrate a point, parents will get this. If you ever had a child who hated maths in grade 4, but loved maths in grade 5, or vice versa, they didn't suddenly become great at maths in summer holidays. The different teacher created a different environment. They go from a C to an A. Athletes change clubs and totally change how they perform. People in business change to a different team and changes how they perform. Now, there's the same intelligence, same work ethic, same values, same education, but how they perform changes based on the environment. So again, I don't want to minimize the importance of talent, work ethic, intelligence, qualifications, knowledge, resources. They're critically important. But I think we underestimate the power of the environment, what I would say culture has on performance.
That makes complete sense. So what I'm hearing is that in theory, it's 50-50, but to meet people where they're at, it's more like 40-60.
Yeah, exactly.
I really thank you for breaking that down for us, because that makes a whole lot of sense. And I'm going to be the uneducated public of
Great.
the
Love it.
world and say, well, hang on a second. How does any of that tell me if I'm going to win a game? How does that tell me anything about if we're going to hit this month's profit number?
It doesn't.
Tell me about that.
It doesn't. All we can do as a team member, as a team, as a leader, is create a great culture and find the processes that work for us with this band of 8 team members or this group of 25 footballers. And the rest is up to the sporting gods or the business gods. But what I know is, and I've seen this working with sporting teams literally mid-game, the more we focus on the scoreboard, the less we focus on our role in the moment. So if you come back to what's the role require of me in the moment, right? So again, when we talk about AFL, if I'm playing on the back line somewhere for an AFL club and the ball's coming towards me, I've got to decide, do I try to intercept the ball or stay on my man or my woman or my person? Then the question is, what's my role require of me in the moment? If I'm watching the scoreboard and go, we're 6 points down, right? I am less able to do my job in the moment.
Especially because you're in the back line. So there's nothing you can do.
Yeah. Well, but the ball's coming towards me, right?
Yes.
But thinking about the scoreboard detracts from my ability to see what do I need to do in the moment? What's the role require of me? And that's in a moment, a split-second decision as an athlete. But teams which do that over the long haul invariably perform better. Like the end result, the P&L at the end of the quarter or the end of the year, the score on the scoreboard end of the game is the product of how well that team did their roles in the moment. It's a consequence. It's a symptom, if you like. It'd be more extreme than what I'm saying.
Yes.
So we can't control the scoreboard. All we can do is control how well and how aware I am of what my role requires of me in the moment. So back to where we started, Eleanor. If I'm a leader in a team where somebody eye rolls at another team member, I've got to go, what's my role require of me in this moment? Do I stick with the agenda or do I unpack the eye roll? And unpack means hold them personally accountable with compassion and kindness.
Yes.
Right? And that decision, that crossroads, how I decide what I do is based on how I see my role. If I see my role as just get through the agenda, I'll get through the agenda. If I see my role as to like build a great culture where people feel safe and belonging and included, I'll address the eye roll. And neither are necessarily right or wrong. It's just how I see my role, which is why for leaders, I think one of the most important leadership competencies is self-awareness. Because to be that moment-to-moment aware of what my role requires of me, you know, in the speed of business, the information coming at me, takes a lot of like self-awareness, you know, and again, the most effective leaders I see as part of that question, what's my role require of me? They are really clear. The old model of leadership is like, I'm the expert. I'm the subject matter expert. So I have to have all the answers, right? That's that more kind of like transactional extractive. I'm the expert. You're just my team members. The new model of leadership, I believe, is the leader who sees their role as the one whose job it is to hold the system steady while the system finds its own answers. And the system could be the organization, could be the team. How do I hold the system steady with enough safety and challenge in equal measures where the system itself finds its own wisdom to complex challenges? And if we do that, we're harnessing the whole team's intelligence, not just my intelligence as a leader.
You know what I love in all of that? I'm just going to replay a couple of things you said. All we can do as a leader is find the processes that work for us and then rely on the sporting gods and business gods. And then you said the word that was going through my head at the time was we actually just need to let go of the fundamental incorrect, stupid belief that we can control outcomes. We just can't. And so then you then went on to say, our job as a leader is to hold the system steady while the system finds their own answers. I mean, that is so powerful. It does remind me, like Chris Scott, you can imagine I am very fond of Chris Scott.
Yes.
Always, when, they'll in the press conferences, they'll try and ask him questions and he'll be like, I've got no idea. That's not my job. Why didn't you go down, to the field at 3/4 time? That's not my job. What about, can you talk about Jeremy Cameron? No, I can't, because that's the doctor's job. It would be irresponsible of me to get involved in that scenario.
Exactly.
And it does take a lot of self-control, self-awareness, takes a lot of humility to realize you are not the sporting god. You are not the business god.
Exactly. And I guess the nuance is, like, we can control the outcomes by not being so focused on the outcomes. That's kind of the counterintuitive,
Right.
like, melts your brain kind of thinking, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you focus on the process, like, you could say the data, so the outcome is data for us.
Absolutely.
Or even if I say better, the outcome is feedback. Now, if we win or lose a game, make money, lose money, that's feedback to, as a team or an organization, how well have you created a great culture, built powerful processes, developed your people, created belonging and inclusion, created a trusting culture. That's just feedback on those big questions. And again, good teams see that as feedback and go, wow, we won a game, lost a game, made a lot of money, lost a lot of money. Okay, that's feedback. What's it giving us feedback to? And how to then change what needs to be changed. So next game, next quarter, next year, the outcome changes. It's
I
not
love,
about it's not about not being outcome driven, because I'm really, really outcome driven.
yes.
It's just being really clear on the mechanism or the mechanisms and the mindset we need to deliver sustainably optimal outcomes.
Errol,
Eleanor.
we joked before this podcast that you were a little, we weren't going to worry about your last name. We'll just introduce you like Cher and Madonna and Oprah and Prince. You are Errol. Can I just say, like, you have blown my mind. You have done a Cher, Madonna, Oprah, Prince
Oh, thank
here
you, Alan.
today. I cannot wait to have you back and talk more about this. I love that you've ended with melting our brain. I don't think we've ever had a brain melt moment on this podcast. But what I love about what you've shared with us today is the inherent contrast in what it means, what high performance means today. But also, I think you've really challenged me, and I will go away and think about this. You've challenged me on where do I actually need to be more courageous and ask the questions and force an answer to the questions that we're just not asking. Like the thought that came to my mind at the end when you were talking about the outcome is feedback and it's feedback on the big questions. Like that would be so fascinating to look at a set of results over time and to say, if we forgot about the dividend and, all of that stuff out, consequences of an outcome, what does that feed back to me?
Exactly. And I think the essential ingredient in all that is we can ask the big questions. But unless we have psychological safety to go deep and honestly into those questions, you aren't going to be able to get the real answers. So how do we create that what I call adaptive safety? How do we create the adaptive safety so when the big questions or the little questions get asked, the level of discussion does justice to the question? Because with inadequate safety, I'm just going to give you the superficial answer. Now, a simple metaphor is like, Errol, how you going? Yep, I'm going great. How you really doing, Errol? Yeah, I'm a bit off, but I'm going to be okay, right? Now, with more safety, you're going to get a much more honest answer. So the depth of our thinking, the depth of our interaction, the depth of our reflection is proportional. The depth of our learning, I think, if I didn't say that already, the depth of all those things is proportional to the safety in that room. So when leaders say, "Oh, my team are a bit like distracted or they're not disengaged." Yeah, they don't feel safe.
I'm going to land this plane by what you have just done in that final moment is you've said the depth of discussion, the depth of thinking, the depth of learning, the depth of questions is proportional to the safety in the room. And I'm circling back to something you said right before then, which really is a nice close to this conversation. That's so critical because the bigger question that we want to address in all of that is how do we get real answers? And why I love that as a close for this conversation is there's a reason why this podcast is called The Real Math of Business. The most important word is not math, it's not business, it's real.
It's real.
And, everything we have talked about today, Errol, I think has been in pursuit of this question, the answer to the question, how do we get the real answers? Well, it's about creating enough safety in the room so that we can encourage the depth of thinking, the depth of learning, the depth of discussion, so we can get the feedback we need to create those answers. Errol, we have just touched the surface, I can tell. Nerd to nerd, I can tell we have just touched the surface. No doubt people will want to connect with you and learn more. First question, where do they buy the book From Fear to Flow? And how do they learn more about what you do and perhaps even connect with you?
The book's available on most online booksellers. I know it's on Amazon. So Fear to Flow, The Adaptive Safety Revolution, and then LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn or my website, errolamerasekera.com.
Thank you so much for your time, Errol. I cannot wait to have you back. This has been a wonderful conversation.
It's been so much fun. Thanks for your great questions, and thanks for the way you I really like the way you took what I said, reflected back to me, and then that was an avenue or a door to go deeper into the conversation. So I think your skills as an interviewer and a podcast host certainly made this a really great discussion and deepened my thinking as well. So thank you for helping me out to deepen my own thinking.
Wow. Thank you. Well, and you know what? I have great fun doing it. And we can have lots of laughs. So thank you again.
Thanks, Alan. That was great.
And what a great chat with Errol. And that leads us right into our listener question. And if you want to submit a listener question, you can now email us at realmathofbusiness@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify and we'll hopefully get it into a future episode. This week's listener question for this episode is from Angelo. Dear Alana, your podcast champions the idea of creating companies where people serve people and the math just works. How can a leader quantify the ROI of investing in employee well-being or genuine workplace connection, especially for an SME where cash flow is tight? Best, Angelo. Well, first off, Angelo, I hope my conversation with Errol might have helped stimulate some ideas that maybe you hadn't thought about before with respect to answering your questions. But it is a very, very good question. So I'm really grateful that you've asked it because there are different levels of depth to the answer of this question. Now, I think the easiest way to start thinking about this is how you would measure the cost of the opposite. So how would we measure the cost of poor well-being or a workplace that does not have genuine connection? So humans like to think about the war stories. We like seeing what goes wrong. So when we think about the cost of well-being and a workplace that doesn't have genuine connection, we can probably come up with, ideas, answers, and experiences of our own. So straight up, I'm thinking of sick days, poor well-being. What does that lead to? Sick days. The cost of delays in projects because people are sick. Sales that don't happen when people are sick. The cost of remedial well-being initiatives. So when there is a trend of this poor well-being, well, what do companies do? They invest reactively. And because they're reactive, they're typically more costly than if a company put in proactive well-being measures. Time delays because people aren't talking to each other because they don't have connections. Unnecessary meetings. Now, for an SME, those costs are really, really obvious. I think it's really critical, or it was very clever of you to put an SME where money is tight. The benefit of SMEs is that they typically measure and rely on timely action. So what they expect is you do something and it has a consequence. So they're really good at their leave as a business. So, when I invest cash in something, what is the return that cash is going to deliver? So because of their size, SMEs are really able to see the impact of an action. So it's much easier for SMEs to monetize the cost of someone being sick. Maybe a particular deal doesn't happen that was going to cover the quarter, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of a generic answer, but it's probably more easy to think about one example. Where a lack of workplace connection cost the business something. So let's say a salesperson goes out to win a piece of work, and they keep that to themselves. They squirrel away in all of their research and they spend a heap of time to ensure that they win the work. So they go out, they win the work. Yay. Then the terms of the contract are passed on to finance to review and input into the system. Finance reviews the contract and goes, there are some costs involved in delivering the project that weren't factored into the price. Well, that's a bummer because we haven't charged what we should, which means that margin is lower. For an SME, a difference in margin is significant, yeah? Also, finance realises that revenue can't be booked in the manner the salesperson thought. Again, for an SME, a budget is built on what a salesperson thinks they can bring in. Now, if revenue can't be booked in that same manner, an SME's budget is far more sensitive to that contract not delivering the way they expected. So you can measure the cost of that. So let's say the opportunity cost of margin and revenue, the timing of revenue, say the opportunity of cost of that is $1 million, let's say. So I say, right, okay, so that's a one-time effect, that's a one-time experience. How many times in a quarter could that happen? Where a salesperson goes and does all this due diligence on a deal themselves, doesn't involve finance, and there are some unintended financial consequences of around $1 million, that in this instance add up to about $1 million. How many times does that happen in a quarter? Now, an SME would have the visibility to say, look, it's probably fair to say that it could happen anywhere between 3 to 5 times in a quarter. So what they're telling me that $3 to $5 million of opportunity cost might be being incurred each quarter, which means, and we'll take the 3 times 4, 12, 3 times 4, $12 million possibly is being lost over the course of a year because there is a lack of genuine connection across a business. So if we're looking at that being the potential opportunity cost, if you're looking at a $100,000 investment in genuine connection, that return on investment is pretty bloody obvious. Now, I've just made up those numbers, but I think the point, I'm hoping that in using those made up numbers, the point is relevant, and I've given you a way to think through this in your own business. The key to ROI on any of these sorts of initiatives is being able to measure it, which is why your question is so excellent, because it is quite hard to do. What you simply need to know, what does bad look like? I've just described that. What the desired outcome looks like, so you can measure, are you hitting the outcome? And then measure the initiative with reference to those two things. Create a scale, 0 to 10. Based on what bad looks like and what the desired outcome looks like, and use an example of one to help measure the dollar value. If dollars are your currency, the dollar value of said issue. I hope that helps, Angelo. Thank you for that question. Really good one. And thank you for listening to The Real Math of Business with Eleanor Bennett. If you liked this episode, remember to subscribe for more content and stay on top of The Real Math of Business. I've been Eleanor Bennett. Thank you for listening.